The Galactic Council had ruled the stars for thousands of years, and believed they understood peace better than any young species ever could. When humans arrived in the council chambers a century ago, the elder races saw them as ambitious but naive. Humanity spread fast across new worlds, building cities, colonies, and trade routes that touched every corner of explored space. Their drive and creativity amazed some but frightened others. The council debated how to control them quietly without war. Some wanted to guide them slowly. Others feared them and demanded limits. When the colony of Varine's moon refused new restrictions on trade and research, the council decided to make an example. They sent peacekeeping forces to bring the humans under control, but the order soon turned to violence. Human protesters filled the streets demanding freedom, and when one spark of chaos began, the soldiers fired. The skies filled with smoke and screams. Then the council authorized orbital bombardments to stop the unrest, thinking it would be fast and simple, but it turned into something far worse. Entire cities were destroyed in minutes, and millions of human lives were lost before anyone could stop the attack. Ambassador Laura Grant stood inside the great glass hall of the council's diplomatic tower, watching the bright flashes on the moon's surface. Her voice shook as she called her staff to prepare an emergency message to Earth. She could not believe what was happening. She had come to Varine to defend her people's rights through words, not to watch them die under the guns of supposed allies. The council members continued their meeting as if nothing had happened, whispering that humanity had forced their hand. Grant shouted that it was murder, but her words were ignored. When she ran to the communications center to send the truth to Earth, guards tried to stop her, but she escaped through the service corridors, bleeding from a wound on her arm after a stray blast hit the wall. She reached a shuttle pad and sent the transmission using a secure frequency known only to her team. The message carried images of burning cities, desperate cries for help, and the coordinates of the massacre. Her last words in the message were simple: "They are killing us." As the last human ships on Varine tried to flee, the council ordered the security forces to stop them. Grant's shuttle lifted off just as council drones fired at the fleeing vessels. The sky became a storm of fire. Her small ship was hit and spun out of control, vanishing into the shadow of the planet. No one knew if she survived. The council later claimed that no human diplomat had been harmed and that the situation was under control. Their statement called the deaths an unfortunate side effect of necessary peacekeeping measures. But the truth had already escaped into the void. The transmission spread faster than light through the human networks. On Earth, families watching the nightly news saw the explosions live. Parents saw the cities where their sons and daughters worked turn to dust. There was no more room for politics or patience. The galaxy had changed in one terrible moment. On Varine, silence fell over the ruins. The alien forces moved through the wreckage collecting data, pretending to restore order. But even some of them felt shame. The commander of the council fleet, Admiral Rel of the Vorian race, stood on the bridge staring at the burned surface of the moon. He had followed orders, but for the first time in his long career, he wondered if obedience was a sin. His officers avoided his gaze, afraid of what they had done. The human cities were gone, the colonies erased, and all that remained were ashes drifting in the thin atmosphere. The admiral turned off the battle screens and walked to his quarters without a word. Far from the war zone, in the great halls of the Galactic Council's capital, the debate began again. Some members praised the operation as necessary to maintain order. Others expressed quiet concern that humanity would not forgive or forget. One elder tried to remind them that fear of one species had led to the fall of many empires before, but his voice was drowned out by arguments of security and stability. The council chose denial over responsibility. They told themselves that the humans would calm down after mourning, that trade and treaties would eventually mend the wound. They did not understand that humanity was not like the others. Humans carried emotion as fuel. Their pain became their purpose, and across the stars that purpose began to take shape. On Earth, President Ethan Cole sat in the dim light of his office watching the transmission again and again. His hands shook as he saw the moment the bombardment began. He had spent his life believing in peace and diplomacy, in cooperation with the galaxy, but now he saw what the Council truly thought of his people. They saw humans as tools or threats, never as equals. He looked out the window at the glowing curve of Earth's horizon and made a silent vow. Humanity would no longer beg for acceptance. They would demand respect in the only language the galaxy understood. He called his defense chiefs, his advisors, and his scientists. The orders were short and final. Prepare for every possibility. The destruction protocol, once a myth from the cold expansion era, was quietly brought out of archives and studied again. Meanwhile, across the colonies, the people began to speak with one voice. News feeds filled with images of the massacre, and within hours protests turned to pledges. Men and women who had never held weapons before signed up for service. Engineers volunteered to rebuild the fleets. Families opened their homes to soldiers moving through. The pain had united them more completely than any treaty ever had. Even children painted the words "never again" on walls and ships. There was no joy in their anger, only resolve. Humanity was no longer the hopeful newcomer among the stars. They were a storm-gathering strength. In the outer systems, soldiers aboard the patrol frigate Dawnbreaker received the news while en route between colonies. The crew fell silent. Some cried, others clenched their fists. Their captain, Aaron Blake, stood before them and said only that history had changed that day. He promised that they would not let their people's deaths mean nothing. His words spread from ship to ship, becoming a quiet oath repeated by thousands. From that moment, every human soldier knew what they were fighting for, and though they did not yet know when or how, they all felt it coming. The moment humanity would rise not as victims, but as the force that would make the galaxy remember the price of its cruelty. The message from Vereen reached Earth like a storm. Every screen on every world showed the same burning images of the destroyed colonies. The broadcast of Ambassador Laura Grant's final words spread across the networks faster than any government could control it. The faces of the dead filled the news feeds, and the cries of the survivors echoed across the colonies. In the great cities of Earth, people poured into the streets in silence first, then in fury. Candles and banners filled the night as the crowds demanded justice. In orbit, the fleets returned from distant patrols, and in shipyards that had been quiet for decades, engines roared to life again. The stars above Earth glowed brighter as new ships were built at a pace no one had ever seen before. Humanity's grief was transforming into something powerful and unstoppable. President Ethan Cole had not slept since the day he saw the transmission. He met with his advisors in the secure room beneath the Earth Assembly Building. The room was filled with the sound of angry voices as ministers and generals argued over what to do next. Some demanded immediate war, others wanted to gather more proof, and a few still hoped the council would apologize. But Cole sat quietly for a long time before he finally spoke. His voice was calm, but everyone could hear the rage behind it. He said the massacre was not an accident, not a mistake, but a choice. He said that humanity could no longer trust a council that saw them as expendable. He ordered the fleets to prepare for full mobilization and told his defense minister to activate the destruction protocol. There was no cheer, no applause, only the sound of people standing up to follow his command. Across the colonies, his order was heard as both command and promise. On Mars, engineers worked without rest, converting mining ships into warships. In the orbit of Titan, shipyards glowed red as new hulls were forged. On the lunar bases, technicians restored ancient defense satellites once meant to protect Earth from extinction. The people no longer waited for orders from above. They worked together with a single purpose, and that purpose was vengeance. Families who had lost loved ones in the Vereen massacre offered their savings to the war effort. Artists painted the walls with the faces of the victims. Soldiers trained harder, and even those who had once spoken against violence now carried weapons. The human spirit that had once sought peace was burning with resolve. In a quiet office on the research station, Helios Dr. Megan Carter watched the news with trembling hands. She was one of the engineers who had designed the jump drive that made interstellar travel possible. For years, she believed her work was a gift to the galaxy, something that united species through exploration. Now she watched as her technology was used to move fleets into formation for war. Her assistant asked if they were doing the right thing, and she answered that she did not know anymore. But she could not ignore the images of the dead, and she knew that to do nothing would mean letting the same horror happen again. So she turned to her console and began to work on upgrading the drive cores to give human fleets faster movement than anyone else in the galaxy. Her tears fell on the screen as she whispered to herself that this time, humanity would not be caught unprepared. Meanwhile, on the outskirts of known space, Captain Aaron Blake stood aboard the Horizon as the crew received orders from Earth Command. His ship was to serve as part of the first response force sent to protect human trade routes from possible council retaliation. The crew was tense but ready. Blake walked through the corridors of his ship, watching his people prepare. They were not fighting for glory or conquest. They were fighting for those who could no longer fight for themselves. When the communications officer handed him the latest report, Blake read it carefully. The council had released a statement calling the massacre an unfortunate misunderstanding, blaming rogue security units for the destruction. The lie was so transparent that it only deepened the fury of every human who heard it. Blake ordered the message deleted and told his crew that they would not wait for another lie to excuse another atrocity. He knew that war was no longer coming. It had already begun. In the council chambers, panic was spreading behind closed doors. The elder races argued among themselves, blaming each other for the decisions that had led to the massacre. Some wanted to send envoys to Earth to calm the situation, while others demanded a show of force to remind humanity of their place. They could not agree, and their hesitation only made them weaker. The reports of human fleets mobilizing terrified them. They had always believed that humans were reckless but harmless, emotional but fragile. They were beginning to realize how wrong they were. The same passion they mocked was now the fire that would consume everything they had built. In the vast deserts of Arizona, a young pilot named Daniel Harris stood watching the night sky filled with the faint glow of ships leaving Earth's orbit. He had lost his sister in the Vereen massacre. He was not a soldier, but he joined the Navy that night. When he entered the training center, he found thousands of others like him, each carrying the same quiet determination. The instructors did not need to shout or threaten. The recruits pushed themselves harder than any army ever had. They knew that the fate of their species depended on them. Daniel often dreamed of his sister calling his name from the burning colony. Those dreams gave him strength instead of fear. He trained until his hands bled, knowing that every drop of effort would bring them closer to justice. In the dark space between stars, a fleet of human exploration ships turned around. They had been charting new systems when the news reached them. Without hesitation, they set course for home. Their crews turned their scientific instruments into targeting sensors, their cargo bays into armories. They had gone into the stars seeking knowledge, but now returned as part of an awakening power. Their logs recorded the same message again and again. The time for peace had ended. The galaxy had drawn blood, and humanity would answer. Back on Earth, President Cole recorded a message for the entire human race. His voice was calm, his eyes tired but steady. He told them that humanity had tried to be part of the galactic community, had trusted the council, and had been betrayed. He said that the massacre of Vereen would not be forgotten, and that no amount of apology or excuse could erase what was done. He promised that they would not strike blindly, but would bring justice to those responsible. His last words echoed across the colonies and ships alike. He said that the stars had always feared humanity for their will, and now they would see why. As his message ended, millions of humans across hundreds of worlds stood in silence. They looked up at the night sky and saw their reflection in the stars. The grief had become unity, the fear had become strength, and the outrage had become purpose. The galaxy had tried to break them, but instead it had created something stronger. In the silence that followed, engines roared to life again. The first fleets began to move into the deep void where vengeance waited. The humans did not know how long the coming war would last or how many would die, but they all knew one thing. The galaxy would never forget what it had done, and humanity would make sure of it. The stars were silent as the human fleets moved through the void. The light of their engines spread across the dark space between worlds like a new dawn rising. Every ship carried men and women who had left behind families, homes, and everything they knew. They did not fight for conquest but for justice. The memory of the Vereen massacre burned in their hearts and guided their every step. The council had called it a misunderstanding, but everyone knew the truth. It had been a message, and now humanity was sending one back. The first human strike came without warning. A council supply convoy near the edge of neutral space vanished into debris within minutes. The attack was led by Captain Aaron Blake aboard the Horizon. His fleet fired only at military targets, destroying weapons and command ships but sparing civilians. The council called it an act of rebellion, but the galaxy watched in fear and awe as humanity's vengeance began. Captain Blake stood on the bridge of his ship watching the drifting wreckage of the destroyed convoy. His crew waited for his command, expecting celebration, but he gave none. He told them they had taken the first step in a long road that would not end until every human victim was honored. He ordered his ships to regroup and disappear into the dark. Their message had been sent. Across the stars, other human fleets began similar operations. Communications outposts were hacked and destroyed, council patrols ambushed, and military stations rendered silent. The humans did not attack blindly. Every strike was chosen carefully to cripple the council's power without causing unnecessary death. They were not seeking chaos. They were reclaiming their right to exist without fear. On Earth, President Ethan Cole received the first reports from the fleet. He read them in silence, his face calm but his eyes heavy with the weight of command. He knew that once this war began, there was no turning back. But he also knew that humanity could not survive by kneeling anymore. He spoke to his council and told them to continue preparing for a long war. He asked the scientists to push their limits, the engineers to improve their ships, and the soldiers to hold the line. He told them that vengeance was not their only goal. Their true purpose was to make sure no species would ever think to harm them again. His words spread across the networks, and people listened not with fear but with pride. Humanity had found its voice, and it spoke through unity. In the council chambers, fear and confusion ruled. The elder races had never seen humans fight with such discipline. They had expected chaos and desperation, but instead the humans fought like a machine with one will. The council's military commanders demanded permission to strike back, but the politicians hesitated. Some believed the humans would stop if they offered peace, while others wanted to destroy them completely before their momentum grew. Arguments turned to shouting, and no decision was made. While they debated, the human fleets continued to move. The galaxy that had once ignored Earth now watched in silence. The smaller species whispered that perhaps the council had gone too far, but none dared to speak openly. Dr. Megan Carter stood inside the vast laboratory of the Helios station watching a projection of new starship designs. Her work on the jump drives had advanced faster than she thought possible. Human ships could now travel twice as far and faster than any known fleet. Her team had not rested for days. They knew that every improvement meant more lives saved and fewer human casualties. She thought of Laura Grant, the ambassador whose final message had started this all, and she wondered if Grant would have approved of what humanity had become. She wanted to believe that Grant would understand. War was not what humanity had wanted, but survival left them no choice. When the technician beside her reported that the new drives were ready for deployment, she felt both pride and sorrow. They were building a future born from ashes. Captain Blake's fleet soon received new orders. Intelligence had found a hidden council station that had directed the bombardments on Virene. The mission was clear. They were to capture it if possible, destroy it if necessary. The crew prepared in silence. Each of them had lost someone, and this target carried deep meaning. When the horizon dropped out of hyperspace near the station, the enemy was waiting. Council warships formed a defensive line, their hulls gleaming under the light of the nearby star. Blake ordered his ships to hold fire until he gave the signal. The two fleets faced each other in a tense standoff. Then the council commander sent a transmission demanding surrender, calling the humans reckless children. Blake listened without expression. When the message ended, he simply said, "Open fire." The battle that followed was short but brutal. Human ships moved with precision, cutting through the defenses and striking only the critical systems. When the council commander tried to flee, Blake ordered his capture. Moments later, the station was destroyed. The humans left the wreck burning behind them as a warning to all who would repeat the council's crimes. Back on Earth, the people watched the reports of the battle in real time. For the first time since the massacre, they felt hope. They saw that humanity could stand against the ancient powers of the galaxy and not be crushed. Families who had wept now raised their heads. Children who had been afraid now dreamed of flying ships among the stars. The unity that had been born from pain had turned into strength. Humanity was no longer a scattered collection of worlds. They were one voice, one will, and one people moving together. The council's attempts at diplomacy failed. Every envoy they sent was ignored or turned away. The humans no longer wanted their apologies. They wanted accountability. They demanded the names of those who had ordered the attack on Virene, but the council refused to reveal them. The humans responded by seizing council-controlled territories along the outer rim. The speed and precision of their advances shocked even their own allies. No one could believe how quickly the humans adapted to war. It was as if they had been waiting their entire history for this moment. The council tried to spread propaganda, calling the humans terrorists, but the galaxy had seen too much. Every destroyed human city, every burned colony, every recorded cry of the dying had told the truth already. Captain Blake became a symbol of the new humanity. His calm voice during battle and his refusal to allow cruelty made him respected even among alien captains who feared him. When asked by a captured council officer why humanity fought with such resolve, he answered simply that they had already lost everything worth losing. His words spread like wildfire through the fleets. They reminded everyone that their fight was not for revenge alone, but for the future of every child who would one day walk under a peaceful sky again. As the months passed, the balance of power shifted. Council fleets that had once ruled the stars were forced to retreat. Human colonies grew stronger, united under a single command. The galaxy began to change. No one dared attack a human world now. Even the elder races who had once looked down upon humanity began to fear their determination. The humans did not rejoice in their victories. Each battle reminded them of why they fought. They built memorials on every captured world, honoring both human and alien lives lost. They fought not to destroy, but to ensure that no one would ever again decide who was worthy to live. At the edge of the known galaxy, the horizon and its fleet drifted in silence after another hard-won victory. The stars reflected on the hulls like distant eyes watching them. Captain Blake stood alone at the observation deck, thinking of the countless lives that had been lost since the first shot was fired. He knew that vengeance was never pure, but he also knew that sometimes only through fire could justice be reborn. Humanity had started as explorers seeking peace, but now they were warriors carrying the burden of memory. The galaxy that had thought them weak now feared their strength, and the council that had once ruled all now trembled. Humanity had become the turning point of history, and their rage had only begun to burn. The galaxy had never seen a storm like the one that humanity unleashed. The stars trembled as fleets of human warships crossed systems once thought untouchable. Every move they made was calculated, every strike precise. They did not destroy worlds for revenge. They destroyed weapons, command posts, and strongholds that had kept the Galactic Council in power for millennia. From the outer rim to the shining core worlds, human fleets appeared and vanished like ghosts, leaving silence and wreckage behind. The elder races watched in disbelief. They had believed humans were emotional and weak, but what they saw now was focus sharper than any blade. Humanity had become the storm that the Council had created through its cruelty, and nothing could stop it. Captain Aaron Blake's fleet hovered in orbit over the shattered world of Thaleen, where one of the Council's major shipyards had once stood. The battle had lasted only 6 hours, and when it ended, the once mighty station was reduced to molten debris. Blake walked across the command deck of the horizon, his eyes fixed on the view beyond the glass. He did not smile. His crew was silent, knowing that victory meant little when so many lives had been lost. They had captured hundreds of prisoners, both soldiers and civilians. Blake ordered them treated with dignity. Humanity would not become what they were fighting against. He told his officers that vengeance without honor would poison their cause. His words spread through the fleet, reminding every soldier why they fought. They were not conquerors, they were protectors of what was right. On Earth, President Ethan Cole listened to the reports of the latest victories. Each one came with heavy losses. Ships destroyed, officers killed, colonies under strain. He knew that the war was not just about battles. It was about survival. He met with his advisors in the quiet hours of the night, his voice steady as he gave new orders. He told them that the goal was not to wipe out the council races, but to dismantle the system that allowed such atrocities to happen. He said that humanity's rage must never blind them to who they were. The people needed hope, not endless destruction. His words reached the commanders across the fleets. Many of them recorded his message and played it before battle. It reminded them that this war was not about hate, but about justice. Dr. Megan Carter watched from her laboratory on Helios Station as new ships left the docks every day. Her work had made these victories possible. The new jump drives and energy cores allowed human ships to strike anywhere and disappear before the enemy could respond. Yet she felt no pride. She felt only the weight of what her creations were being used for. She had wanted to make humanity reach the stars, not burn them. Her team celebrated each new success, but she stood apart, staring into the stars and wondering how many more would die before peace returned. She told herself that if her work helped end the war faster, then maybe it was worth it. She only hoped humanity would remember mercy when the time came to choose between revenge and peace. In the council chambers, panic turned to desperation. The once mighty leaders were now hiding behind fortified planets and silent fleets. Entire sectors had turned against them, joining humanity or declaring neutrality. The old order was breaking apart. Some of the council races tried to open secret talks with human commanders, offering information or support in exchange for protection. Others tried to flee the core worlds, afraid of the fleets they had once mocked. The council's great army, once proud and united, began to fracture. Admirals refused orders, captains deserted, and planets declared independence. The authority that had ruled for centuries was collapsing, and all because they had thought humanity would never fight back. Captain Blake's fleet was ordered to advance toward the capital system, where the council leaders had retreated. The mission was clear: destroy the defenses and prepare the way for the final assault. As the horizon moved through the void, Blake thought of Laura Grant, the ambassador whose message had begun it all. He had heard stories that she might still be alive, captured during the massacre and held somewhere near the capital. The thought gave him strength. He told his crew that they were not just fighting for revenge, but to bring back the truth, the proof that humanity's cause was just. When the fleet arrived near the capital's defense line, they found a wall of ships waiting for them. The council had gathered its remaining fleets for one last stand. The battle began with silence. Then the darkness exploded into light. Thousands of ships exchanged fire in a storm of energy and debris. The horizon shields burned under the impact, but Blake refused to retreat. He ordered his ships to press forward to break the line. The humans fought like a single mind, moving together without hesitation. When the council fleet tried to flank them, the Horizon's 2nd Division emerged from hyperspace behind the enemy, cutting off their escape. It was the largest battle humanity had ever fought, and by the end of it, the void was filled with the wreckage of 100 worlds worth of ships. The humans had won, but at a cost so high that silence filled every deck. When the smoke cleared, the council's capital stood before them, its defense grid flickering. Blake gave the order to hold position. He would not bombard the planet without reason. He sent a message to the council demanding surrender and the release of all prisoners, including any humans held captive. Hours passed without reply. Finally, a single transmission came through. It was not from a council leader, but from a weak and trembling voice. It was Laura Grant. She was alive, speaking from a prison cell beneath the council's main tower. Her message was short. She said that the council had fallen apart and that some of its members wanted to negotiate, but others were preparing a final desperate act. Before she could say more, the transmission cut off. Blake ordered an immediate ground operation to rescue her. His soldiers descended through the smoke-filled skies of the capital world. The battle on the surface was fierce but short. The council's defenses were collapsing, their soldiers surrendering or fleeing. Blake's troops moved through the burning streets until they reached the prison where Grant was held. When they found her, she was weak but alive. She looked at Blake with tired eyes and asked if it was finally over. He told her not yet, but soon. Together they were brought back to the horizon. The moment her face appeared on the transmission to Earth, the people cheered. For the first time since the massacre, they saw the woman whose courage had begun their fight for justice. President Cole himself spoke to her through the transmission and promised that the end was near. As the human fleet prepared for the final step, Blake looked out at the dying light of the council capital. He thought about everything humanity had done and everything they had lost. They had fought the greatest powers of the galaxy and survived, but survival had come with a price. Millions of lives had been taken, countless worlds scarred. He wondered if peace could ever return after so much blood. Yet when he looked at his crew, he saw hope. They had endured the worst and remained human. He whispered to himself that as long as they remembered why they fought, there was still a chance for redemption. The galaxy had tried to destroy them, but now it would learn the meaning of justice. The storm was not over, but the dawn was near. The fires of war had burned across the galaxy for months, and the light of destruction could be seen even from the far edges of human colonies. The Galactic Council had lost half its fleets, and their worlds trembled under the steady push of human forces. The once proud elder races who had ruled the stars for centuries now watched helplessly as their stations fell one after another. Earth's united navy moved like a single living thing, with each fleet supporting the other and every soldier driven by a single shared memory of what had been done to their people. On the command deck of the flagship Resolute, Captain Aaron Blake stood silent while the images of the latest battle scrolled before his eyes. The Council's main defense line had been shattered, and their capital world, Virene Prime, lay only a few days away. His officers looked to him for orders, waiting for the word that would end the war. He took a deep breath and gave a quiet command to set course for Virene Prime. Across the ship, thousands of men and women prepared for what they knew would be the final strike. Engineers checked reactors, pilots ran flight simulations, and soldiers cleaned their armor in silence. There was no celebration and no talk of victory. They all knew this was not about conquest or glory. It was about justice for the millions who had died, and for every child who had watched their home burn under the Council's weapons. President Ethan Cole sent a final transmission to the fleet, his voice calm and steady as he told them that history would remember not their anger, but their courage. Humanity had come to end tyranny, not to become it. When the human armada emerged from hyperspace, the sky above Virene Prime turned dark with their presence. The Council's remaining fleets rushed to defend their world, but it was too late. Human ships moved with perfect precision, forming walls of fire that broke the enemy lines within minutes. The orbital stations that once guarded the planet exploded one by one as plasma beams cut through their cores. On the surface, the Council chambers were in chaos. The elder species shouted over one another, demanding surrender, evacuation, or vengeance. None of them could agree on anything until the sky itself began to glow red from the burning ships above. Then they finally fell silent. Aaron Blake ordered his fleets to disable the remaining weapons and to open channels to the surface. The Council's leaders refused to respond. They had spent generations believing they were untouchable, that no younger species could ever threaten them. But the reality was now inescapable. Their fleets were gone, their armies shattered, and their people terrified. On one of the smaller transport ships orbiting Virene Prime, a rescue signal appeared unexpectedly. It carried the identification code of Ambassador Laura Grant, who had been presumed dead since the massacre months ago. Her voice was weak but clear as she confirmed her survival and said she was being held in a prison complex on the planet's northern continent. Without hesitation, Aaron sent a special operations team to bring her back. The team descended through the burning atmosphere in stealth shuttles, moving between the wreckage of falling satellites and debris. They landed near the facility and broke through the defenses with silent precision. Inside, they found Laura Grant in a dark cell surrounded by terrified guards who surrendered immediately. She had been starved and beaten, but when she saw the human soldiers, her eyes filled with tears and pride. They helped her stand and led her to the shuttle. As they lifted off, she looked down at the planet below and whispered that justice had finally come. Back on the Resolute, Laura was brought to the bridge to meet Aaron Blake. The crew fell silent as she entered, her body frail but her spirit unbroken. She looked out at the burning world on the screen and asked if they were going to destroy it. Aaron shook his head and said that they would not destroy what was already broken. Humanity would not become what it hated. Instead, he ordered that all surviving Council leaders be brought aboard for surrender negotiations. The message was sent, and within hours the remaining ambassadors arrived under heavy guard. When the Council's representatives stood before Aaron Blake and Laura Grant, there was no anger in her voice, only quiet strength. She told them that the age of the Council was over, and that their power had died the moment they ordered the massacre. Humanity did not seek to rule the galaxy, she said, but they would never again allow anyone to decide who lived or died. The ambassadors tried to beg for forgiveness, to offer reparations and promises, but humanity had already moved beyond words. The fleets were ordered to help stabilize the surviving worlds, deliver food and medical aid, and dismantle the old power structure that had caused so much suffering. When the war ended, Earth called for the creation of a new galactic assembly, based on equality rather than fear. Every species, young and old, would have a voice, and none would hold the power to oppress the others. Laura Grant became the first ambassador of the new era, her name remembered as a symbol of endurance and strength. She spoke to the galaxy from the steps of the ruined council hall, her voice broadcast to billions. She said that humanity had learned through pain what it meant to be powerless, and that they would never let that happen again to anyone. The crowd of refugees and survivors listened in silence as she promised that the stars would belong to all, not just to the powerful. As years passed, The scars of war began to heal. The worlds once burned by conflict started to rebuild under human aid and guidance. The fleets that had once brought fear now carried supplies and engineers. The name of humanity no longer meant rage or vengeance, but hope. Yet deep in every human heart remained the memory of the day the Council massacred millions and of the promise made afterward. Never again would they allow such a crime. The galaxy had changed forever. And though peace returned, everyone knew it was built on the strength of those who had refused to bow when everything was taken from them. In the end, humanity had not only survived, they had redefined what it meant to be free among the stars.